In the heart of an ancient forest, where the trees stretched skyward with a solemnity that spoke of centuries past, there lay a hidden, untouched glade that few knew of and even fewer dared to approach. It was said that the land here was old, older than the very concept of time itself, and that it harbored secrets so profound and dark that the human mind could scarcely comprehend them. John Hathaway, a man of science and reason, had always scoffed at such superstitious notions. Yet, as he stood at the edge of this very glade, something primal within him trembled. The air was thick with an unnameable scent, a mixture of decay and ancient earth, and the light that filtered through the dense canopy above seemed to cast more shadows than it dispelled. Compelled by a force he could neither understand nor resist, John stepped into the glade. The silence here was absolute, as if the very birds and insects feared to make their presence known. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself was reluctant to let him go. As he ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes that resembled gnarled hands reaching out to grasp at the unwary. And then, there was the statue. It was an effigy of something neither human nor animal, a grotesque figure that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Its eyes, carved from some unfathomable black stone, seemed to follow John's every move, and its mouth was agape in what could only be described as a silent scream. The air around the statue was colder, charged with an energy that made John's skin crawl. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, and a sense of dread washed over him, so potent that it was almost tangible. It was then that the whispers began. At first, they were barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but they grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a cacophony of voices that spoke in a language John could not understand but felt, inexplicably, that he knew in the depths of his soul. The voices spoke of things that should not be, of ancient rites and blood sacrifices that fed the earth and kept the delicate balance between life and death, light and darkness. They spoke of the statue as a guardian, a sentinel that watched over this sacred place and ensured that the old ways were not forgotten. John tried to flee, to tear his gaze away from the statue and run from the glade, but his body would not obey. He was rooted to the spot, ensnared by a power that was beyond his comprehension. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness fell like a cloak over the forest, the statue seemed to come alive. Its stone surface rippled and shifted, and for a moment, John could have sworn he saw a flicker of malice in its eyes. It was the last thing he ever saw. The forest reclaimed him, as it had reclaimed so many before, and the glade remained undisturbed, a place of beauty and terror where the veil between worlds was thin, and the ancient powers that lurked in the shadows held sway. In the days that followed John Hathaway's disappearance, the forest seemed to whisper his name with every gust of wind that rustled through its ancient boughs. The local villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, a mixture of fear and reverence in their eyes. They knew, as did all who lived in the shadow of that foreboding wilderness, that the forest claimed what it wished and offered no returns. Margaret, John's sister, refused to accept the whispered rumors of his untimely fate. Her brother, a man of logic and reason, could not have simply vanished into the ether. Guided by a resolve that bordered on obsession, she set out to uncover the truth, heedless of the warnings that the forest was a place of old magic, where the boundaries between the seen and the unseen were blurred. As she entered the forest, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the forest itself sought to dissuade her from her path. Yet, Margaret pressed on, drawn by an unseen force towards the heart of the woods, where the glade and its sinister guardian lay in wait. The statue, when she finally beheld it, was more terrifying than she could have imagined. It loomed over her, a sentinel of darkness, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly malice. The whispers began anew, this time recognizing her as kin to the one who had come before. They spoke of sacrifice and the cyclical nature of life and death, hinting at a truth too terrible to fully comprehend. Margaret, unlike her brother, felt an inexplicable connection to the voices, as if they echoed thoughts and desires she had long suppressed. They offered knowledge, power over the natural and supernatural alike, in exchange for her allegiance to the old ways. Temptation gnawed at her resolve, promising answers to questions she had not dared to ask. The forest around her seemed to come alive, its creatures emerging from the shadows to bear witness to the choice she faced. A choice between the light of the world she knew and the darkness of a realm beyond her understanding. It was then that the statue moved. Not with the jerky motions of something inanimate forced into motion, but with the smooth, assured grace of a predator. It stepped down from its pedestal, the ground trembling with each footfall. Margaret stood her ground, her heart racing with fear and fascination. The statue, now clearly not just a statue, spoke in a voice that was both ancient and timeless, a voice that resonated with the very essence of the forest. "You have come," it said, its words echoing in her mind rather than heard with her ears. "You seek what was lost, but are you prepared to pay the price?" Before she could answer, the forest was bathed in moonlight, casting everything in a silvery glow that seemed to suspend time itself. Margaret, caught in the moment, realized that this was not just a test of her will but a rite of passage, a doorway to understanding the mysteries that had claimed her brother and so many before him. The decision she made that night would seal her fate, intertwining her destiny with the forest and its ancient guardian. The path ahead was fraught with danger and wonder, a journey into the heart of darkness that promised to reveal the true nature of the world, hidden beneath layers of reality and myth. As Margaret stood before the entity, the moon's argent light seemed to cleave the darkness, casting an ethereal pallor over the glade. The entity's voice, though not heard through ears but felt within the very marrow of her bones, wove a tapestry of ancient truths and esoteric knowledge, a lure that tugged at the core of her being. "The forest breathes and lives through the cycle of sacrifice and rebirth," it intoned, the air vibrating with the power of its words. "Your brother understood this, albeit in his final moments. His essence nourishes the soil upon which you stand, becoming one with the life force that sustains us." Margaret's heart ached with the revelation, grief and understanding mingling in a tumultuous embrace. Yet, within her, a spark of curiosity was kindled into a flame. The promise of knowledge, of secrets unveiled, beckoned her closer to the abyss that yawned before her, tempting her to peer into its depths. "You seek to follow him, not in death, but in understanding," the entity continued, its form shimmering with a spectral light. "To do so, you must embrace the ancient pact, to become a guardian of the threshold, a keeper of the balance between light and shadow." The forest around her seemed to hold its breath, awaiting her response. Margaret felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, not with malice, but an expectation born of eons of tradition. The choice was hers to make, yet it felt as though it had always been inevitable, a path preordained by the very stars under which she stood. With a resolve that surprised even herself, Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke. "I will embrace the pact, to seek the wisdom hidden in shadow and light. But I do so on my terms, as a seeker of truth, not a servant to darkness." A silence, profound and reverberating, followed her proclamation. Then, the entity laughed, a sound that was neither joyful nor mocking, but full of an ancient sorrow. "So be it, seeker of truth. The path is open to you, but know this, the truth you seek bears a cost, one that will change you in ways you cannot yet comprehend. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the entity retreated, merging with the statue once more. The forest exhaled, the tension dissipating as if a decision of great consequence had been made, altering the fabric of fate itself. Margaret felt a change within her, a connection to the forest and its secrets that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew that her journey had only just begun, a journey that would take her into the heart of darkness, where the line between the natural and the supernatural was blurred beyond recognition. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to unfold around the village. Animals behaved with an uncharacteristic wariness, and shadows seemed to linger longer than natural. Whispers of a guardian, a new protector of the ancient balance, spread amongst the villagers, though none dared to speak openly of such things. Margaret found herself walking a lonely path, caught between two worlds. She studied the old ways, learning the language of the forest, of wind and shadow, of light and darkness. She became a figure of myth, a bridge between the seen and the unseen, respected and feared in equal measure. Yet, as she delved deeper into the mysteries of the forest, she could not shake the feeling of being watched, of a presence that lingered just beyond the veil of perception. It was a reminder that the pact she had made was binding, that her quest for truth was as much a journey inward as it was a venture into the unknown. As autumn's mantle began to drape itself over the forest, painting the foliage with hues of fire and gold, Margaret's communion with the ancient forces deepened. The air grew crisp, and the nights lengthened, shadows dancing with a life of their own as the veil between worlds thinned. It was during this time of change that Margaret felt the pull of the forest most acutely, its call resonating with the very fibers of her being. One night, under a moon swollen to bursting and as bright as polished bone, Margaret ventured deeper into the forest than she had ever dared. The whispers of the old ones, those that had walked these paths before time had given them shape, guided her steps. They spoke of a place where the heart of the forest beat strongest, a nexus of power ancient and raw. She found herself in a clearing she did not recognize, where the trees arched overhead, forming a cathedral of wood and leaf. In the center stood an altar, stone worn smooth by the passage of uncounted years, its surface stained with the patina of old sacrifices. The air here was thick with a power that tugged at the edges of her consciousness, whispering of secrets that clawed at the boundaries of understanding. As Margaret approached the altar, the ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse, a heartbeat that matched her own. A sense of inevitability enveloped her, a knowledge that what was to come had been ordained by forces beyond her control. She felt the presence of the entity, its consciousness intertwining with hers, a cold embrace that filled her with both dread and anticipation. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged. They were not human, nor were they entirely of the forest. They existed in the space between, their forms shifting and indistinct, made of shadow and mist. They encircled the altar, their voices joining in a chant that was older than the hills, a song of creation and destruction intertwined. Margaret understood then what was required of her. The pact she had made demanded a sacrifice, a willing offering to the ancient powers that governed the balance between light and dark. She had come to seek knowledge, but the truth bore a price paid in blood. With a resolve that surprised even the shadowed figures that watched her, Margaret drew a blade from her cloak. The metal gleamed in the moonlight, an echo of the stars above. She placed her hand upon the altar, her heart beating a frenzied rhythm. But it was not her blood that the forest craved. From the shadows stepped a creature, a deer with antlers that branched like lightning, its eyes aglow with an otherworldly light. It approached the altar, a willing participant in this ancient rite. As Margaret made the sacrifice, the air thrummed with power, and the veil between worlds grew thin enough to tear. The blood of the deer soaked into the stone, and the earth trembled. A wind rose, whispering of things hidden and things revealed, of doors opened and thresholds crossed. Margaret felt the power of the forest surge through her, a torrent that threatened to sweep her away. Yet, she stood firm, a conduit between the ancient and the mortal, a guardian of secrets too vast for the human mind to hold. In the aftermath, the forest grew silent, a respectful hush that spoke of thresholds crossed and pacts fulfilled. Margaret knew that she had irrevocably changed, marked by the ancient forces that she had dared to commune with. She was part of the forest now, in ways she could never have imagined, bound to its cycles of life and death, light and shadow. As she made her way back to the village, the first light of dawn painted the sky with strokes of pink and gold. The world seemed different, as if she were seeing it for the first time through eyes that had been open to the mysteries that danced just beyond the veil of reality.